Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills, through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. We had a great time on Saturday in Los Angeles at the Warner Grand Theater. on behalf of KPFK, our Pacifica affiliate in LA, and I believe the largest FM station in the country, certainly west of the Mississippi. Greg Palast and I, great fun. And I'm guessing you can watch the video of that. We had it on Facebook all weekend. I'm guessing you can watch it over on Greg's site, gregpalast.com, if you're interested. So we've got, you'll recall last week, I was talking about Kristallnacht, right? The 80th, I believe, anniversary of Kristallnacht. It was 1938. Yeah, that would be the 80th anniversary is November 9th. It's about 2 weeks from now. And we've now had our Kristallnacht. I'm not sitting here saying that I was prescient or anything, but it certainly seems like, that's it. This is it. And the Republican Party, I mean, here we have a party that is pro-war, pro-gun, pro-death penalty, voted against denying guns to terrorists or the mentally ill, sowing the seeds of racial hatred, opposing food stamps for kids. There he is. All this stuff, it's like the Republican Party has morphed into a death cult, it seems to me. And the question in my mind is, how do you deprogram the victims of a death cult? This happened to the people living in Nazi Germany. I knew some of these people. I knew when Louise and I lived in Germany back in the 80s, I knew some old Nazis. They literally had been programmed. It happened in Japan. And the thing that broke the programming for those two death cults was losing in the war. What's it going to take here? Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the first hour of the program, taking your calls for the hour. He's a congressman from California. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back on.
How do we deprogram the people who have been so aggressively programmed by Fox News and right-wing hate radio and now the mainstream Republican Party, frankly, into this to use the quote from Milton Mayer's book, I believe it is, this orgy of hate and fear?
Well, it's a challenging and difficult question, especially as we see the incidents of violence break out across the country in a way we haven't seen for decades. I don't have a magic solution. One person suggested that where you have universities and colleges, in community colleges, you've seen greater appreciation for diversity and a greater appreciation for free thinking, and that we ought to be really looking at expanding those institutions of higher learning and expanding preschool education across America into parts of the community. I mean, I think that it's a long-range process of how do we get a liberal arts type education or people questioning information they're receiving, and it's not some short-term fix.
Yeah, it seems also that there's like institutional stuff. I may not have these details right, but I'm pretty sure I do. That during the Reagan administration, Bill Bennett, as the education secretary, who had his very, very short run for president, his main thing was abolishing the Department of Education, which of course is why Reagan put him in charge of it. Bill Bennett, who gave us such wonderful little clips as, check this out. This was literally Ronald Reagan, Secretary of Education back in the day. This was in the 80s. Here we go. Oh, it's not playing. Anyway, he just said some pretty outrageous things. But basically, my understanding is that they took civics out of the recommended, national standards. They weren't mandatory national standards, but the recommended standards for education. And now some minority of our schools apparently teach civics. And again, I'm not sure on that fact. I know that, because people call into the program all the time saying, well, they don't teach physics here in my town in Mississippi. And then somebody will call in from some, wealthy town in California or upstate New York and say, oh, we had a great physics class just, last year's, or excuse me, civics class.
Right.
So what do we do?
Well, the question I would ask Will Bennett, and then I'll answer your question. Remember when he wrote that book, The Death of Outrage, after Bill Clinton scandals. I mean, where is William Bennett these days? I mean,
well, he wrote the Little
is...
Book of Virtues too. He might have passed away. I mean, he had that huge gambling scandal.
Well, maybe.
I do know.
I don't want to speak ill of him, but where are the people who shared his view and were clamoring for virtue and criticizing the death of outrage? I mean, why don't you hear any of those voices with what Trump has done in making a mockery of the presidency? I mean, there's been silence. But I think having some basic civic education and teaching folks about the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Gettysburg Address, the I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, his speech about militarism in the Vietnam War, some basic things about American history would be the part of the answer in combating propaganda that is totally inconsistent with our founding. I mean, our founders, though not perfect, were really philosophers. I mean, they had this sense of the Enlightenment ideal of knowledgeable citizens. It was a very small group of citizens, white male property owners, but amongst those citizens, they thought you ought to have education, and you ought to have reason, and you ought to have debate, and you really ought to read. And so we are so far away from that in terms of what constitutes political discourse that a return to some of the basic principles that founded this country and bringing that into education and education in every part of the country, I think that is the only long-term way that you combat the ignorance and the hate.
Yeah. And yet there's this both sidesism that makes me crazy. I don't see Hallie Jackson's MSNBC show is on 7 a.m. here on the West Coast, and I watched the first 10 minutes of it or so this morning. And she started out with John Kasich, the Republican governor from Ohio, who was doing his both sidesism. You know, well, both sides have to tone back the rhetoric. I'm sorry, I'm not hearing this kind of hateful rhetoric on our side, number one. And number two, then she ended that segment with a clip from Ronald Reagan talking about how we can't have racism in the United States. It's a terrible thing. As if, you know, that was like Reagan's position. Reagan's first speech after he was in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were murdered, and it was a speech to an exclusively white audience on states' rights. Here's the Bill Bennett clip that I was looking for. This is what Bill. See, again, these guys they've been catering to the racists since the 1980s. This is Bill Bennett, the former Secretary of Education.
But I do know that it's true that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could, if that were your sole purpose, you could abort every black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down. That would be an impossible, ridiculous, and morally reprehensible thing to do. But your crime rate would go down.
See that?
Wow.
You know, and nobody even freaked out when he said that back in the 80s.
Amazing. I mean, it's just shocking when you think about historical figures and you wonder how they said certain things. This is an example of someone in contemporary times is spewing that kind of hate. It's just shocking.
I think you can draw a straight line from Reagan's speech in Philadelphia and Bill Bennett's comments like that. And these were not, I mean, these kinds of comments came out of the Reagan administration regularly. They were just very rarely discussed. The other thing that blows my mind, I'm sorry to monopolize you here. I will turn you over to our callers in just a second. But the other thing that blows my mind is that there's really the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. There's three pieces to it that are really pretty major. You know, I think, in fact, let me get the exact quote here. The first major piece of it is exactly what the shooter tweeted out an hour before he committed the murder. There's a Jewish organization called HIAS, H-I-A-S,
yep.
and you know and I'm looking for what exactly that's an acronym for, but basically it's the international. Well, it's a Jewish group that helps refugees, and originally mostly they helped Jewish refugees, and now they're helping refugees from all over the world. Here's his tweet from just before he went to shoot these guys up. These people in the synagogue. HIAS likes to bring invaders in to our country who kill our people. I can't stand by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics. I'm going in. And then on October 20th, he had, in response to a National Refugee Shabbat event that was put on by HIAS, he tweeted in response to them, because they had just listed the addresses of 300 Jewish congregations in 33 states that were celebrating the work of HIAS. He said his response to them, and I'm not sure this was a tweet, it might have been a Facebook, it simply says alongside a link in the New York Times. He said, "You like to bring in hostile invaders to dwell among us? ? We appreciate the list of friends you have provided, period." In other words, the list of churches. And this church was or synagogues, this synagogue was on that list. So you've got that. You got the fact that the shooter was using an AR-15, which is why he was able to kill so many people and take out 4 cops. I mean, he didn't kill them, but he shot 4 cops, and they were wearing body armor. And then, of course, you've got the anti-Semitism, and it seems like everybody's focusing on the anti-Semitism, which is huge and important, and it's a crisis in America. But I think that Reagan or Trump's going off on the caravan, and he's back to it again this morning. Was probably the thing that actually triggered this guy or pushed this guy to do this particular act in this particular synagogue at this particular time. Your thoughts?
Tom, I appreciate you raising the issue of HIAS, because there's a beautiful piece by Lev Golinkin today, actually, in the New York Times. And Lev is someone I know. He came to this country when he was 9 in 1980, and he talks about how HIAS helped him and his mother and his family come to the United States from the Soviet Union, and what HIAS meant. And he talks about how HIAS now is actually not helping primarily Jews, because the focus is on refugees more broadly, and why that has engendered so much hate. So you're absolutely right that the primary motive of this shooter seems to be a concern of immigrants coming into the United States. And there was an article I read where the right has this novel, The Camp of Saints. I don't know if you've read it, but it's this a French novel talking about people actually, of all places, India, coming in boatloads, 1 million Indians to invade France.
Oh my God! It's like the Turner Diaries. We got to hit a break here. We'll pick up your calls for. Hang on just a second here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
If we hit 18 minutes past the hour, the machine stops me. We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna. He'll be taking your calls in just a moment. Welcome back. And HIAS stands for the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, as we were just discussing. So did you want to finish that thought, sir, or shall we just pick up a phone call? You ready to go?
Well, very quickly, I would just recommend Lev Golinkin's piece in the New York Times about the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and what they're doing. And then I was shocked about this novel, The Camp of Saints, where it really shows the paranoia of some of these conservative nativists, where they're really concerned about an invasion, which is totally non-factual. But that is what Trump is he's intentionally stoking those fears, and we shouldn't be surprised if it's inciting violence.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Turner Diaries?
I am not.
The Turner Diaries is a novel that was published in the late 60s or early 70s. And in this novel, the hero of the novel blows up the federal building in Oklahoma City. And in response to that, the Democratic president bans all guns in the United States. And in response to that, the good Christian white people come out with their guns, and a mass slaughter ensues. And all the people of color and all the Jews are dead at the end of the novel.
Wow.
And a new Christian white society is emerging out of the ashes, and everybody's singing and holding hands. And that novel became the animating vision of what we would today call the hard right back in the 70s, and continues to be a bestseller in those circles. And that was what inspired Timothy McVeigh. He blew up the very building they talked about in the novel. And on a date that was significant to the novel, and the second anniversary. Go ahead.
I will have to look at it and read it. I mean, partly we have to know what the ideological underpinnings of what's causing some of this hate, because some of these folks just say, "Oh, this is someone who's a nutcase or an individual actor," and that's not true. There is a systematic ideology that is feeding this violence that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I can save you some time or the trouble of reading a very, very poorly written but well-read novel. If you Google the Turner Diaries in quotes and my name in quotes, you'll find several op-eds that I wrote about it back more than a decade ago after when I read the book.
I'll read that. I'd rather read that than a poorly written novel.
That have a lot of excerpts that you'll find useful. And sir, again, I talked too long. I'm sorry. We have just a minute until we're going to hit the end of this break or the other side of this break. What are your thoughts on what's going on right now?
I think we're facing the type of violence we haven't seen since the 1960s. The difference is in the 60s, at least, there was more of a political consensus on combating that violence, and now you have many in the party not willing to confront some of the hate that is animating the violence. So it's a scary time, and I think it's a time of requiring great courage from people across communities to stand up for values of openness and pluralism and tolerance and decency, knowing that we're facing violence on the other side.
Yeah, it truly is. This is, and we so need somebody in the White House who, the way Lyndon Johnson soothed the country after the assassination of Jack Kennedy and after the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, or, after 9/11. Well, I don't know. I'm kind of ambivalent about Bush's response to 9/11, but
at least he looked out for Muslim Americans. I mean, I totally disagreed with Bush, but at least there was some reservoir of Americanness in him that's totally missing from this president.
Yeah, it's tragic. Okay, we'll be back. It's going to be the rest of the hour here. Ro Khanna and you. We'll be picking up your calls for Congressman Khanna right after this. Stick around. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Marty in Farmington, Michigan, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, good to talk to you folks. On the subject of dangerous propaganda, I'm very concerned that Trump is dominating the political messaging through his rallies. And a question for the congressman, I'm wondering why the Democrats don't organize a truth squad to follow Trump around to these rallies. The way local news covers news events, they'll tend to look to try to present both sides. So I think if the Democrats had some attractive spokespeople at every rally, the cameras would spend some time talking to the Democrats to get their response to what Trump presented in his rally.
Well, it's an intriguing idea. I mean, first, it's going to take a lot of courageous folks to go on those tours, because Trump has incited violence at some of his rallies, telling people in the rallies that it's okay to punch people or it's okay to strike back. And, of course, they don't let in anyone but Trump acolytes into the rallies. But organizing something nearby to try to get the attention of the media, it seems to me worth trying. I mean, look, the media gave Trump hours and hours of free coverage during the presidential campaign where they were covering these rallies uninterrupted. And if you ask them why, it was all for ratings. And so maybe that would break through. I do think we can have our own rallies. I mean, the person who's attracted that kind of energy on our side has been Bernie Sanders, who can get thousands of people, and maybe Beto O'Rourke in Texas, and see if we can try to organize these kind of rallies across America on our issues.
Yeah, I saw on Saturday that we're just 40 seconds out from a break here. I saw on Saturday that Bernie did a rally either Friday or Saturday that had like 15,000 people. I mean, it was just absolutely huge, and it was for a congressperson that I'd never even heard of. And no coverage. No coverage. Why not?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's Bernie was shut out of coverage for the longest time in the presidential campaign, and I think the media continues to ignore him on some of these rallies. Maybe if he announces for president, it's one of the reasons I think he should run. They'll be forced to cover him this time. But I would love to see the media covering Bernie's rallies on issues like mass incarceration and wage equality and other things, because I do think the energy he has at these rallies on a positive agenda for the Democrats could break through.
Yeah, I saw part of it. It was all issues. He was not calling names. It was, it's like the antithesis of Donald Trump. Congressman Ro Khanna represents the 17th District of California, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you can reach Congressman Khanna's website at khanna.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro, R-O, Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A. We'll be right back. Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us is Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. His website, khanna.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna, R-O-K-H-A-N-N-A. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And Congressman, let's pick up some phone calls, okay?
Sounds great.
All righty. Joan in Nashville, Tennessee. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Joan?
Is this for Joan?
Yeah,
yes.
Joan, yeah, you're on the air.
Just let me say I'm 74 years old, and the state of the country right now is new for whites, so therefore it's news, and it's a crisis. African Americans have lived through the same state of tension and violence ever since we've been in this country. So now it's a problem because it's negatively affecting whites. If racism is to be erased, it can only be done by whites. Black people cannot do it for whites. Only whites can. And I'm not saying that whites who define themselves as non-racist should confront the racists in a violent way, but they need to call them out each and every time they make statements like we see and have heard that these races make. And even if it means alienating your friends and family, it's something that you have to do. And whites alienate their friends and families all the time when they take an opposite political position. So why not on racism? You know, if a black person encounters a white person who respects them as a human being, then that black person is more likely to generalize that experience to all whites. Whereas if a white experiences a positive situation with a black person, they will not then generalize that positive experience to all black people. And you just, I mean, it's just pervasive. Now you see on TV during the commercials and in the different sitcoms and other shows where you have different variations of families. It includes different ethnicities. That's something that America could have been doing all along, you know, since the invention of TV, but now they're just now doing it. And, you know, racism is something that was created by whites. It's perpetuated by whites. And I can understand why, because they think that it benefits them. And that's, you know, I can understand that. But, you know, when they talk about playing the race card is never out of play. It's always on the table. You know, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Joan. Finish your thought, and then I wanted to add a comment, and we'll toss it to Congressman Khanna.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. The point I wanted to make is that, I just learned this over the weekend, the last Democratic president who was elected with a majority of the white vote, in other words, the last Democratic president for whom more than 50% of whites voted, was Lyndon Johnson in 1964. In 1965, he signed the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and never again did a majority of whites vote for any Democrat up till this day. Never has happened again. And, you know, of course, Richard Nixon went in and said, okay, we'll scoop up, you know, all the white people in the South and turn them into Republicans and like that. And it is far more pervasive. You are absolutely right, Joan, in my opinion, and it's far more pervasive, I think, than even most white people realize. Joan, are you done? Should we toss it to the congressman?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about Lyndon Johnson. I mean, you know, especially black people talk a lot about Lincoln, but he had his reasons for doing what he did, which was to save the Union. He didn't necessarily care about the freedom of black people.
Yep.
But with Lyndon Johnson, and I put him even over FDR, because the programs that FDR instituted, black people were not able to benefit from in the very beginning. And even now, because our lifespan is shorter than whites, I mean, when you think about Social Security. But with Lyndon Johnson, he did the morally decent thing, and he knew the political cost when he did it, but he did it anyway. To me, that is a true leader.
Amen. Congressman Khanna,
yeah.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you for the call. Congressman Khanna, your thoughts?
Well, I appreciate Joan's perspective, and obviously it comes from a life experience and great wisdom. And I think it's important what she said about FDR. I was down south with Jim Clyburn, and we were talking about FDR and the new rights, and I was enthusiastic about FDR's philosophy. And Jim Clyburn said to me, you realize, Roe, African Americans didn't get to participate in most of the programs of the New Deal, and made Joan's point that it was really Lyndon Johnson who opened up those programs. So I would take away two things. One is to realize when we're talking about the New Deal or government programs, we have to be mindful of the country's history of exclusion of African Americans and the minority population, and really take that to heart going forward. And two, Joan reminded me of Ta-Nehisi Coates' article about Trump being a white president, and he's making the point that African Americans have been dealing with a lot of these issues for many years, but it's now that the issues are affecting white America that there is a greater attention, and we should just continue to be mindful of the racism and stereotypes that afflict this community, and I think there was some naive hope when Obama was elected that we had moved past some of this, at least in my generation, and it's been a chilling reminder that many of these problems persist, and we still have a lot of work to do.
Amen. Jeff, in Rogers, Arkansas, you're on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Good morning there, Tom.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, just fine, Jeff. Go for it. Ask your question.
Okay. I was selected to ask Congressman Rohana that don't we have laws against people yelling fire in theaters and inciting riots and causing civil distress? Well, I believe our president has maybe be doing that. And that's my question, is that could there be something bipartisan done about this? We need to at least take and call the president on it to stop doing this, because it's pretty bad when you got bombs in the mail and people getting killed going to church.
Well, and there was also the two African Americans who were killed up in, where was it, Kentucky or Tennessee, after this guy tried to get into a black church to do a slaughter. Three incidents in the last 4 days. Back to you, Congressman, or the last week.
Well, certainly I think the president's speeches have bordered in certain places on inciting violence. That isn't protected speech. I mean, political speech is protected in many ways for good reason, but not incitement of violence. But more than just the president, part of my concern has been on these social media platforms where the pipe bomber basically had tweets that were inciting violence, and Twitter did nothing to remove them. Here on Gab, there was a platform that with the synagogue killing where there was basically an incitement to violence and nothing was done. So I think, yes, the president has to have more responsibility, but some of these social media sites need to be far more vigilant about speech that is clearly inciting violence and that is not protected under the Constitution.
John in Minneapolis, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment that, a lot of these social media platforms repeat things from propaganda websites that come from think tanks. I don't know how you control that. And then Fox News is essentially a propaganda machine. People are fed a steady diet, and that is what they, if they only watch that, and that's what they hear, and they repeat all the talking points, and most of them are false or lies or twisted in some way. And so we have a big problem. We have, I think, a truth-optional democracy, and unfortunately, it's not going to work. It doesn't work anywhere. Propaganda, like in the Soviet Union, it didn't work because it flies in the face of reality eventually when the society completely breaks down. And I think that's what we're headed toward. We're headed toward Brazil. Look at their political situation and what has gone on there. We can, next get in somebody who is an ex-military right-wing nut, even worse than Donald Trump. This is not beyond, reason to say that that's a possibility. So, you can go ahead and comment on that. I find it very frustrating that, if I was in the press corps, I would have quit. I think they all should get up when they catch Donald Trump in a lie, just walk out and say, no, we have had enough of this. When you want to tell the truth, we'll go ahead and report it.
Yeah, amen. And the other thing, Congressman, is that it seems that almost, there are websites that have been tracking this, in MediaMatters.org, for example. Almost every time Trump tweets out a lie or something outrageous or something inflammatory, it follows by 10 or 15 minutes a segment on Fox News that basically said just that. And there's a report this morning that he literally is spending 3 times more time every day watching television than he does being president. Congressman.
Yeah, I saw that he has apparently 9 hours for personal time blocked out on certain days.
Yeah, executive
and you
time,
wonder how that works. I mean, if you have a working day of 12 hours and 9 of those hours are for tweeting and watching television, and what he's doing is, there's an echo chamber between him and Fox News, and it looks like he gets part of the propaganda from Fox News, and then he tweets it out, and if he wants to spread propaganda, he puts it out, and Fox News repeats it. So it is a definite concern. And now the question is, how do you address it, and what gives you hope in that situation? I mean, the hope is he still lost the popular vote. I am very confident that he's going to lose the Congress this time, and that there is, in my view, the majority of the nation, a significant majority, whether it's 55% or 60%, that does not subscribe to his type of politics, and that people are tiring of it, and that we are going to be able to break through. So I guess you have to, if you're in Congress, share some optimism that the American people are going to get sick of the lies and sick of the half-truths, and that we're going to be able to right the ship. And we need to just keep being vigilant and getting our message out and advocating education so that people can be engaged in critical thinking.
Yeah, although the situation in Brazil and the Philippines and Poland and Hungary and now Italy on the verge, these are scary things. We'll be back with your calls for Congressman Connor right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna. His Twitter handle is Rep, as in Representative, Rep Ro Khanna. And welcome back. Joe in Cupertino, California. You're on the air with, I think he's your congressman, Congressman Ro Khanna. You represent Cupertino, Congressman?
I do.
There you go. Joe, one of your constituents is on the line. Joe, you're on the air.
Good morning, sir. Tom, it's a pleasure to have me on again. I wanted to ask a question, but let me just throw this out there. Close your eyes for a second, Congressman, and what do you think your first priority should be when we take back the House? Is it the Electoral College? Is it Kavanaugh? Is it to call a vote for Yemen? Is it to do something, if you can, to assault weapon ban or something? But I wanted to suggest, just for a moment here, I was listening this morning, and this gentleman was talking about this poor woman who was killed in Pittsburgh, and she was mourning the death of her husband 2 years prior with the mourner's Kaddish. I mean, I'm an immigrant, if you will, of Jewish heritage. My grandparents came here from Israel, not Israel, but from the Bolshevik Revolution at the turn of the century. And I can appreciate how it must feel to be an African American, a person of color. I live in this community, and it's so diverse. We have people from India, we have people from China, we have people from Taiwan, and me, I've had to step out of my comfort zone to try to get to know these wonderful people because they feel like they're being attacked because of the way that they look. So I appreciate you congressman, as my congressman. You must hold the record for town halls in Congress. I don't know if there's any other congressman that shows up in his district every month, it seems like. I don't know, but I'd like to find out if you have the record for the most town halls in Congress.
Okay.
Earlier, the
Thank
conversation
you,
was talking about
Joe, we're going to run out of time here. If you keep going on, we'll have to let Congressman Khanna respond to your question. Thanks for the call, Joe.
Well, thank you, Joe, for the point and the kind words. I would say Medicare for all should be our first priority. I think when you look at candidates across the country, over half have run on Medicare for all. I think health care has come up in almost every election, and that's something people will expect. I said you did mention our district. Our district is almost 35% foreign-born. It's one of the most diverse districts, and there hasn't been any real incidents of violence, and it's also a district that has produced extraordinary economic success. We have our issues with people being left out, but I think that's a sense of a model for the country in a way of how to model diversity.
Yeah. Let's see here. Corky in Hilton, New York. Corky, we have 1 minute to the break. You got a real quick question for the congressman? Corky? Oh, geez. Corky's usually pretty good. Anyhow, Congressman, first priority, it seems to me that a first priority now, it shouldn't be, I don't think, a political first priority, but voting rights. I mean, if it wasn't for voter suppression, for election fraud, Donald Trump would not be president right now. In fact, if it wasn't for voter suppression in Florida in 2000, George W. Bush would not have been president. We would have a 7-3 liberal majority on the Supreme Court right now if it wasn't for voter suppression. I realize just taking the House isn't going to be enough to do something about that, but are there plans?
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right, Tom. More than the Russia scandal, which is terrible, is the voter suppression. I mean, Hillary Clinton would have clearly won that election if minority populations in Wisconsin and North Carolina and Florida had been allowed to vote. We have two giants in the United States Congress, John Lewis, who was beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for voting rights, Jim Clyburn, who went to jail for the fight for voting rights. I absolutely think we need to make that an extraordinarily high priority and be aware, as John Lewis and Jim Clyburn will say, that the fight is still very much ongoing.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Congressman, you wanted to finish the thought or pick up the next call?
Just to say that I appreciate your continuing to raise that, because it's
the issue of voter suppression.
The voter suppression, because it's structurally related to everything. I mean, you want to get Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, net neutrality, and get us out of these bad wars. Well, we would be able to do that with sizable majorities if we really were counting every person's vote in this country, and we're not, and that's why we've been losing many of these states, which we would be winning if there was, forget if there was massive turnout. We would be winning them if just the people who wanted to turn out's votes were being counted.
Yeah. Ron in Berrien Springs, Michigan, listening to WCPT. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Tom and Congressman. A caller earlier called and said we should have truth squads, and you commented that could be dangerous. These are Bund meetings. Remember the Bund meetings from the 30s and 40s? They had to be confronted. I'm almost 70 years old. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I volunteered to go into Vietnam to fight against war in Vietnam. If we don't stand up now, are we going to walk to the gas chambers and dig our own graves? There are people who are willing to stand up now to these Bund meetings. If there are people willing, and we should have the backing of people like you. The truth has got to be put forward. We are not cowards to confront these Nazis, American Nazis. Your comments, sir.
Well, thank you for your service in Vietnam, and certainly I admire your courage to speak out, and I would stand with any citizen group willing to, whether it's protesting Donald Trump's rallies or whether it was the courage people showed at the Kavanaugh hearings and confronting senators and exercising their freedom of speech, or whether it's organization at town halls and the courage that takes. My point was not to discourage people from doing that, rather to just point out the courage, the absolute courage it takes to do that in the world we're currently living, where violence is a possible consequence. And I admire very much people like you who are willing to do that and take on that confrontation, and agree that this is a time for active citizenship to honor the sacrifices that those like you made to defend America.
Adam in New Orleans, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Congressman. Without a vibrant, trusted free press, democracy dies. We need laws that make it illegal to use psychological warfare tactics on our people. Breaking up media giants that dominate the messaging and a new fairness doctrine would help too. Is Congress ready to take up, making it illegal to use psychological warfare tactics, the propaganda, the gaslighting, that kind of thing, illegal to use on the American people? Thank you.
Well, absolutely. There have to be some standards to certainly cable news and broadcast news. The fairness doctrine I support, which is basically to allow alternative perspectives, and that's something that we don't hear. And I would be willing to look at not censoring people, but having some standards that doesn't allow psychological manipulation, just like we don't allow pornography or don't allow speech that incites violence on these television stations. There should be some basic standards. And so I I do think that's a fair project for Congress to undertake.
John in Kent, Washington, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello?
Hey, John, you're on the air.
Yes, I just wanted to make a few comments about what's going on with Trump and his rallies, and if the congressman has been aware of what Obama did to Al-Qaeda clerk.
Was that your comment, John?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure what John's talking about there. Do you know, Congressman?
I am not sure
Okay.
that I
All right,
understand.
let's get another caller in here. Then Walter from Northridge, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
If that's me.
Yeah, that's you. We have just 1 minute to the end of the hour here, sir.
I'm very, very eager to see the good people seize the press much better. I do think that from our point of view, Congressman, and that's progressive, thoughtful, rational people, there's an overwhelming majority of people who are eager to see everybody vote.
Okay.
And that ought to
Walter,
be...
I have to stop you at that point. We have 30 seconds left. Congressman, your thoughts?
I agree with the caller in that there are an overwhelming number of people who are progressive or decent who seek leadership, and I think we have to go directly to the people. You talked about Bernie Sanders' town hall. I mean, I think we've got to go have these rallies across America on issues of health care, minimum wage, mass incarceration, getting out of bad wars, and have people mobilize on our side. That's the only way we're going to defeat the kind of propaganda and closed-mindedness of the president's rallies. And we need people on our side who are going to have that energy, fire, and ability to mobilize people directly and go around traditional media stations directly to the people.
Amen. Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you so much for being with us today,
Thank you.
Good talking with you. His website, khanna.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Marooned, Jamestown Shipwreck and a New History of America's Origin by Joseph Kelly, published by Bloomsbury. This is from the introduction titled In the Beginning. A storm at sea, waves swelling higher than the ship's deck, and wind like an axe chopping off their caps and throwing water at the heavens. So much seawater in the air, it seems it will drown the lightning. The sky pours down stinking pitch, sulfurous smell, and thunder. A brave vessel full of noble creatures climbing the waves and sliding into the troughs, its seams barely holding together. So opened Shakespeare's Tempest in a cold London theater in the winter of 1611. It was a true story. To use today's common language, Shakespeare ripped this scene from the headlines. Only there were no headlines in 1611. Newspapers had not been invented. The first English language periodical, a weekly broadsheet, was printed 10 years later. Ironically enough, in Dutch-speaking Amsterdam. News of great events circulated the streets of England's towns in more entertaining, less dependable channels. Pamphlets, sermons, songs, notices posted in town squares, private letters passed from one reader to another. And rumor. Buzzing like the crowd noise preceding the play, a cacophonous, often contradictory sailors' stories seeped up from the docks of London, Southampton, and Plymouth. And plays, even those as fantastical as The Tempest, dramatized the rumors and publicized what was going on in the world. The story of storm, wreck, and redemption was the talk of England. Although a century had passed since Columbus first crossed the Atlantic, the open sea still preyed on the sailor's psyche in a way that coast-hugging Europeans had never felt. When a storm came on the Western Ocean, there was no chance of running to harbor. Voyagers were beyond the frontiers of civilization, encroaching on spaces unlit by Christianity, where dark forces reigned. Anything could happen. At the height of Shakespeare's play, a few noblemen come on deck, demanding to speak with the ship's master. "You mar our labor," the boatswain answers. "Keep your cabins. You do assist the storm." The words sound like revolution, at least on the surface. The seaman seems to be a leveler who favors meritocracy over aristocracy. "You are a counselor," the boatswain tells Gonzalo. "If you can command these elements to silence, use your authority. If you cannot, out of our way, I say." Gonzalo warns him, "Remember whom thou hast aboard." None that I love more than myself," replies the sailor. "What cares these roarers for the name of king?" Such stuff might embolden the common sort to check their supposed betters. One might think so until it's remembered that the common sort was not in the audience's play. The Tempest premiered to the elegant, enclosed Blackfriars Theater. The more democratic and open-air Globe Theater was always crowded with groundlings who stood in the pit chewing their sausages. But tickets to the indoor, winterized Blackfriars Theater, they were pricier. London's aristocracy sat in their boxes dressed in finery, and the guildsmen and craftsmen and professionals, up to perhaps 1,000 patrons, filled the rest of the audience. Rich though they were as eager as any to see on stage what they'd heard in rumor, what had happened to the Sea Venture. The players wobble strut on the stage as if in the heaving and tossing deck of that ship, while the master and boatswain shout instructions into the noise of the wind. "Take in the topsail." At all costs, they must keep steerage way. They catch just enough wind to point her bow into those rising seas. If a wave should take them broadside, it might roll the top-heavy ship until the mast kissed the water and she would not rise again. "Lay her a hold, set her 2 courses off to sea again, lay her off." All labor for naught. The ship does not roll, but its very boards come apart, letting in the sea like a sieve. The scene ends with mariners flooding the stage, clothes dripping with salt water, crying in despair and fear. We split. Farewell, my wife and children," the sailors wail. "Farewell, brother." Elizabethan theater may have skimped on props and sets and special effects when judged by the standards of our own blockbuster action films. It had to rely on the words of the actors to paint the scene. As Shakespeare himself put it, the breath of those who watched the play must fill the ship's sails with wind. But Shakespeare's words, they whipped up gales in the minds of the viewers. The patrons quaked under the shock of thunder and lightning. A ship full of 150 souls split at sea in the midst of the most terrible storm, and yet every person lived. This was England's most shocking, unbelievable news. More than a year earlier, on the 15th of May, 1609, the Sea Venture set sail from London, the admiral of an impressive fleet. The Diamond, the Falcon, the Blessing, the Lion, and the Unity, as well as a Pinnace, a shallow draft boat designed for coastal exploration, too small to be named, sailed behind her, headed to Virginia, the third and by far largest resupply of 2-year-old fledgling Jamestown, England's tiny, rough-hewn, and hungry little campsite, its only toehold on the vast American continent. The flotilla was the largest and most expensive and most promising overseas expedition that England had ever organized, and 600 people crowded into the vessels would triple or quadruple the population of the colony. It seemed that all England applauded their departure. Crowds of London's ever-curious spectators, one historian explains, lined the river's banks and cheered as the 7 ships, sails billowing, flags flying, glided past them on the spring afternoon. Several weeks later, after a stop at Plymouth increased the fleet to 9 vessels, they left England's tow. The book Marooned by Joseph Kelly. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In the last hour, we had Congressman Ro Khanna on for the hour, taking calls from all over the country on issues of the day. We've been talking about HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which is the organization that the fellow who did the mass slaughter in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, an hour before he fired the gun, he posted this message on Twitter. I believe it was on Twitter. It was on one of his social media accounts. HIAS likes to bring invaders in who kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics. I'm going in. This is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. They do help immigrants come into the United States. So there's an issue of immigration. There's obviously the issue of anti-Semitism. And then there's the issue that he had the AR-15. It's amazing. And then, of course, Trump now is blaming the media for all this, right? Blaming the media. And one of the things that we're discovering as time goes on is that, you know, I've made reference to the Trump crime family in the past, and increasingly it's looking like that's not just some kind of weird slogan. Heather Vogel is with us. She's a reporter with ProPublica. Previously was a reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which when Louise and I lived in Atlanta, we used to read regularly, a great newspaper. ProPublica.org is the website, and her Twitter handle is hvogel, Vogell. Heather, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I regularly read ProPublica's app, actually, you know, and I came across these articles that you wrote. I'm not sure if you wrote both of them. One of them was kind of a deep dive into how Ivanka and her brother Don and particularly Donald Trump were basically scamming people, lying to investors and ripping them off and walking away with the money. And then another one was a list of all the projects where they pulled this off. Can you tell us about this?
Basically, we took a really deep look at one of their real estate deals, but we also took kind of a quicker look across a dozen deals that the Trump organization has been involved in over the last, about 14 years or so. And what we found was a pattern of deceptive practices is sort of stretched across those projects, across countries, across time. And we found, there were two primary elements to it that involved the Trumps very directly. And do you want me to just
sure.
Go ahead and tell you what? Okay,
yeah,
great. So the first was in these projects, Trump is brought in. He's a licensor, so he's really putting his name on the project. But he typically, in most of these cases, had no equity or no stake in the development, and he wasn't the developer.
In other words, he puts no money into it. Just
exactly,
right.
Exactly. He wasn't. He had very little risk, basically. But he would go out and say things that were suggestive that would lead people to think that he was either the developer or that he had a financial stake in the project, had invested his own money in it. And this happened repeatedly. Many projects, from Panama to statements Ivanka made in Baja. There was a Tampa project where he said he had put a substantial stake in. He wanted to increase it, but units were selling so great that he couldn't. And the problem with those types of statements are that buyers are using them to evaluate how safe and solid the investment is, and how much of a risk they'd be taking by investing. And when they see someone like him, who claims to be sort of a financial real estate guru, out there suggesting that he's put his own money in it, that leads to sort of a false confidence. It leads them to, sort of throw their money in too, when in fact he did not really have.
Isn't that fraud on his part?
Well, I can't say that. It's a good question. It was one of the questions that we raised, certainly. And we talked to one former federal prosecutor who said that some of the deceptive practices we were describing did resemble elements of fraud cases that he'd seen prosecuted and investigated. So that question's out there. There was a case in Soho where there was a criminal investigation. There were prosecutors here that wanted to make a case against the Trumps. One of the statements they made was that they were the developer. Another very common misstatement they made was to inflate the number of sales that had already been made. And remember, these are new buildings, and so people are kind of making commitments. They're putting their down payment down even before the unit's been built yet. So it's more risky than sort of buying into a building that's already there. And so the Trumps would go out in a number of cases and say things like Ivanka would say in Soho, we're 60% sold, when documents showed later that really it was only 15%. In Panama, she said they were more than 90% sold at one point, and it was at a critical point when the ratings agency right around when the ratings agency was considering a downgrade, which they did a couple months later. But she said they were over 90% sold, and in fact, it was 79% at best, and a lot of those buyers ended up walking away. So these are very sort of specific statements that they made that were demonstrably false in a number of cases.
Wow. So we basically have a grifter as president and a grifter in his daughter as the one of his principal advisors. And her husband, his father, went to jail for being a grifter in this sort of thing, in investment scams. What do we do with this?
I think it's one of these things where these projects are, they're spread out over time, they're spread out over jurisdictions. Buyers have filed a lot of lawsuits. A lot of those have settled. There's been a couple of cases where Trump has won. They were cases, my understanding is they were cases where a judge looked at the contract and found that the actual sales contract had all the necessary disclosures and did not, make a finding in favor of the buyers. But they've gone through the civil route in a lot of places. There were considerations of criminal charges in Soho. Some of the behavior may be outside the statute of limitations at this point. It's really an open question about whether anything happens from here. But certainly a lot of people were hurt in these deals because so many of them went belly up.
And when they went belly up, what happened to the Trumps?
Well, that's what's interesting about it. And that's actually what drew me to the story was I was taking a look at his real estate deals, the more recent ones, and what I was really struck by how many of them failed, bankrupt, foreclosed, never built, construction wasn't finished. And it just raised this question to me about why is he doing this over and over? And also, why are people partnering with him? Because he's got a number of different partners in these deals. What I found out was that his licensing agreements provide often a pretty sizable upfront fee, and then some of it is predicated on the percentage of sales and things like that. But we found clauses like one in Panama where even for unsold units, he would still get paid, even if units weren't sold by a certain time. He would get paid per unit, even for the unsold units. So. There was a lot of money that he could get without the project having to perform very successfully.
So he cuts a deal with a local developer to build a Trump building. He charges them a whole bunch of upfront money, millions and millions of dollars for use of his name. He promotes the deal. People put money into it. And a piece of that money is instantly skimmed off the top and given to Trump as his licensing fee or as his fee for that. And then the thing goes belly up. It declares bankruptcy. There's no way to claw that money back from Donald Trump. So him and Ivanka walk away with the money, and the investors are stuck with the bankruptcy, getting pennies on the dollar. Is that my understanding of what you're saying?
Yeah,
Is that right?
Yes, mostly. When the project went bankrupt in Panama in 2013, he did shave his fees by $20 million. But from our estimate, he still received $30 to $55 million on that project. And what, to me, one of the more striking things about that project, to me, was that it was financed with a corporate bond. So people bought bonds in order to, is basically sort of a way of lending their money to the project. $220 million in bonds were sold. Now, eventually, on that principle, only there was $120 million that was not ultimately paid back, is what one investor told me. But he again still made between 30 and 55 million from what we can figure out.
That's amazing.
There were interest payments too, so they didn't.
Heather, we're going to hit a break here in a second. But
okay.
the one thing that it just blows my mind that the Republicans held years and years of congressional hearings and lots of hyperventilation that Hillary Clinton was talking on an insecure server in her personal email from home, which never was even hacked. And they have nothing to say about the fact that Donald Trump is using an unsecure iPhone in the White House over the loud objections of everybody from the Secret Service to the NSA, doing something far worse. Similarly, the Whitewater was a land deal that Bill Clinton invested in back before he was governor of Arkansas, where he and Hillary lost $35,000. It went down in flames, just like so many of Trump's hotels. And the Republicans pursued him on this for years. For 6 or 7 years until they finally found Monica. And Trump is doing far worse in case after case after case. Where are the Democrats on this?
I didn't examine that political element of the story at that point, but we tried to contact. We contacted the White House. We contacted Trump Organization. We gave them, a very lengthy list of questions, sort of detailing all of this, line by line, what we found, and gave them a chance to respond. And we never heard back.
That is absolutely remarkable. Heather, you're doing great reporting. Heather Vogel with ProPublica.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on the program and for doing this important writing. I strongly recommend anybody who's listening or watching the program right now, go over to ProPublica.org and you can read that. And you can tweet Heather at HVogel, Vogell. Heather, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. All right, take care.
Nice meeting you. We'll be back. Stick around. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How do you deprogram a third of the country if they are cult members, essentially? And we're going to get into guns, immigration, and anti-Semitism. And welcome back. Kenyatta in Redlands, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm very sad today as a result of what has taken place in this nation over the last few days. I'm not the biggest USA booster in the world, but I don't like to see these kinds of things. You may recall not too long ago, some weeks ago, I mentioned to you, you were kind of reluctant to accept it, that this was coming, these types of events.
Yep.
And when Joan called, you had a caller earlier, and what she said really struck me in terms of this is a time, Tom, where the grief should unite all good people. But yet, even in this grief, I see racism. Black people, as she said, we have had our churches, we've had our little girls bombed in church. A couple of years before I was born, the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed. And always it seems that religion has it's this weird thing, the KKK burned crosses, and we've had our churches bombed. Dylan Roof, as you know, some years ago, about 3 years ago, went into a black church and killed almost as many people. There were no flags at half-staff for those black victims, as has been ordered by the president. In fact, Dylan Roof, from what I understand, was given food from Burger King after he committed this massacre. The reality is, Tom, is racism is in the DNA of the United States. The United States doesn't know how to exist without it any more than it knows how to exist without war. And this country has to acknowledge this sickness, this cancer that is part of this country before we can enter or embark upon any type of a treatment regimen.
Yeah. And we need to have an honest conversation about it, and it needs to be led from the top down, and that's certainly not a conversation that Donald Trump is going to lead. In fact, if anything, he's doing the exact opposite.
He is, and I fear that this is going to, unfortunately, this is going to get a lot worse because this is I'm looking at the things that are in the news right now, and it's just amazing.
Yeah.
This country's not evolving, it's revolving. If anything, we're still talking about, we're relitigating Roe v. Wade all over again. I mean, with the Kavanaugh thing. I remember growing up with that.
Yeah.
We're not I grew up with busing. Well, we're not necessarily having busing, but we're defunding all the public schools. Variation on the same thing. We still have racial violence. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it truly
And
is.
sad.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. No, and it's very, very sad. It's very disheartening.
And I think Joan was absolutely right. Nate and I were talking about this. We're going to take her call and clip it out and make it a separate YouTube and put it up later this afternoon, because she was so spot on in what she had to say, and that white people have to acknowledge this, and what I shared after that call that I learned over the weekend, that the last Democratic president who was elected with a majority of white votes was Lyndon Johnson in '64, before the Voter Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, Voter Rights Act. That shocked me, frankly. I didn't, and I guess even exposed to all this, I had thought that there was less racial sentiment in the white community than apparently there is, Kenyatta. So
no,
go ahead.
No, I'm just saying you're absolutely right. And if white America wanted this stuff to stop, it would stop.
Yeah.
And so that's the conversation that white people have to have.
You're absolutely right. And it's a conversation that I am trying to lead on a regular basis here. Kenyatta, thank you so much for the call. We'll be back. It is 21, coming up on 22 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. There's a bunch of stuff that I think is just so important with regard to this mass murder of Jews in Pittsburgh. Brian Krasenstein is just tweeted this morning: under Trump's watch, we have had the deadliest massacre of Jews in United States history. We have had the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. That was Las Vegas. We've had the deadliest high school shooting in U.S. history. That was Parkland. And we have had the biggest political assassination attempt in U.S. history, which was the bombing attempt this week to take out virtually the entire leadership of the out-of-power Democratic Party. So we have that, right? These new milestones, shall we say. You'll recall last week I did a whole hour on Kristallnacht. Now, the anniversary of Kristallnacht is not going to come for two and a half weeks. It was November 9th, 1938. But so the 80th anniversary will be November 9th of 2018. But I wanted to talk about it a couple of days ago, last week, because it just felt in the air like this is how it had to have been in Germany in the days leading up to Kristallnacht and the night of the broken of glass. The two nights of rage when 100 Jews were killed and thousands of Jewish homes and businesses had their windows smashed by followers of Trump. The German equivalent of the maggots here, and the Pittsburgh, I think it was the Gazette, the political reporter or the political cartoonist who is now retired, but you know, still occasionally does cartoons, just created a cartoon of Kristallnacht, right? In other words, it said, you know, it showed the shattered glass on the pavement and in front of the synagogue, and it said broken glass, which is what Kristallnacht, you know, it means the night of the broken glass. So you have that. But the thing that the two pieces of this that are basically not being discussed in the media are HIAS, H-I-A-S, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and the AR-15. This guy was able to kill all these people and wound a whole lot more and shoot 4 police officers because he had an AR-15, because he had a weapon of war in one of our cities. He walked into a synagogue with a weapon of war. Why do we allow weapons of war on our streets? Please tell me why. I don't get it, right? And we've had this conversation many, many times, and we need to take the weapons of war off our streets. Full stop, number one. Number two, HIAS. HIAS, the guy who did the shooting in the synagogue, this fool who did this criminal, I lack words that are not obscenities, who did this shooting. 2 hours before the shooting, or just, you know, within 2 hours of the shooting, he had posted, well, actually, on a few weeks earlier, on October 20th, the HIAS had posted a link for information about the National Refugee Shabbat event, where, you know, HIAS is helping refugees come into the United States. And he said, "You like to bring in hostile invaders to dwell among us? We appreciate the list of friends you provided." Because they had posted a list of 300 Jewish congregations in 33 states. One of those was this synagogue. And then an hour before he shoots up the synagogue, he tweets, "HIAS likes to bring invaders in who kill our people. I can't stand by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics. I'm going in." This is more than just anti-Semitism, although the anti-Semitism alone is horrible.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Going after HIAS, why would he do that? Well, because Trump is hysterical about the caravan. Trump has turned this whole thing into immigrants, right? It's all about immigration. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Gar Alperovitz's book, What Then Must We Do? Gar is an economist, by the way, and this is from the introduction. I borrowed my title, What Then Must We Do, from Tolstoy and the profoundly disturbing 1886 book that he wrote once he began to dig below the surface of what was happening in late 19th century Russia, a time when the system was in decay, the aristocracy enjoyed extraordinary luxury, and the peasants endured lives of hunger and pain. As a person of privilege, he began to understand something deeper about his time in history. Tolstoy wrote, "I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me, and yet assure myself and others that I am very sorry for him and wish to ease his lot by all means possible, except by getting off his back." Most of us do not literally sit on men's backs, making them carry us. We do, however, often uneasily look the other way, satisfying ourselves with modest changes that reassure us that all is well, while millions are in despair. We've done the best we can do, we might say, given the realities. Still, many sense, as did Tolstoy, that to actually do something serious would require us to confront much deeper problems than we are commonly willing to do. What then must we do is not shouted in the streets, but it is a question that more and more Americans, young and old, liberal, radical, and conservative, are quietly beginning to ask themselves in much more penetrating ways. So let us begin. My starting point is the obvious fact that despite its great wealth, the United States faces today enormous difficulties, with no easily discernible political answers that even begin to offer strategic handholds on a truly democratic future. Elections occur and major fiscal debates ensue, but many of the most pressing problems facing ordinary citizens are only marginally affected, and in many cases in ways that increase burdens, not reduce them. The issue is not simply that our situation is worrisome, however. It is that there are growing reasons to believe that we in fact face systemic problems, not simply political ones. Systemic problems in the fundamental, not the superficial sense. In the pages ahead, I will suggest that our nation's truly critical problems are built into the very structure of the economic and political system. They are not something passing in the night that will go away even when we elect forward-looking thinkers and actively pressure them to move in a different direction. I won't load you down with statistics at this point. A couple of obvious reminders, however. Not only has the economy been stagnating for a long time, but for the average person and the average family, things have been bad for a very long time. Real wages for 80% of Americans' workers, for example, have not gone up more than a trivial amount for the last 3 decades. At the same time, income for the top 1% has jumped from nearly 10% of all income to roughly 20% of all income. Put another way, virtually all of the gains of the entire economic system have gone to the tiny, tiny group at the top for at least 3 decades. Worth pausing to think about that one. What's going on when virtually all the gains for the entire economic system go to the top? I'm not interested here in criticizing those at the top. The question is, we can do that later, the question is, what is going on with the system when this kind of thing happens and continues to happen in an ongoing way, year after year, decade after decade? Another reminder, almost 50 million Americans live in officially defined poverty. The rate is higher, not lower, than in the late 1960s, another disturbing trend marker. Moreover, if we use the measuring standard common throughout the advanced world, which considers the poverty level to be half the median income level, the number would be just under 70 million, and the rate would be almost 23% of all Americans living in poverty. That is to say nothing of steady increases in global warming and an unemployment rate that, if properly measured, is stuck in the range of roughly 15%. At the most superficial level, Washington, as the saying goes, is broken. Give or take an occasional gain in selected areas, the political system is simply incapable of dealing with the deeper challenges. It focuses on deficits, not answers. Long trends that don't change are a clear signal that it's not simply the modern period of partisan bickering and congressional stalemate that is causing the problems. The trends are moving steadily downward. We're moving steadily downward long before the Tea Party and the recent partisan foolishness, long before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision allowed corporations to put big money directly into politics, and long before many events that have heralded as tipping points one kind or another. Nor are people stupid. More and more have a sense that something different is going on, both with the economy and more fundamentally with democracy itself. A few more bits of information just as reminders again of something that we're all beginning to see. A mid-2011 poll found that roughly 80% of Americans believe their congressional representatives to be, quote, more interested in serving the needs of special interest groups than the people they represent, end quote. Another poll found that almost 4 out of 5 believe a few rich people in corporations have far too much power. And only 37% of Americans, much more than a third of the population, have confidence in the most solemn and august of American institutions, the Supreme Court. I'm going to dig much, much deeper into all of this, of course, but for now, let's leave it at this. When critical, long trends do not improve, when they steadily get worse year in and year out, it is clear that we face deeply rooted systemic problems, not simply political problems in the usual sense of the term. Moreover, as these polls suggest, people increasingly understand that something is really wrong. The question is, how do we deal with a systemic crisis, something built into the way the political economy works, rather than just a simple political or economic crisis? Garo Pavlovitz, what then must we do? Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Boy, there's the news is just breaking all around us. Judd Legume, who used to be with the Center for American Progress, this Think Progress, and I'm not sure where he is or what he's doing these days, but he just broke. It's so weird that, I mean, this was tweeted at 11:52 a.m. This, I guess that's East Coast time. So this was just an hour or so ago. I didn't catch it. We had Heather Vogel on talking about how the Trump crime family is engaged in fraud. Here's the tweet from Judd Legume. He writes, breaking, a civil RICO suit has been brought against the Trump Organization, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, and Ivanka Trump in the United States District Court for their participation in a pyramid scheme. And this is from the filing, from the lawsuit. For more than a decade, the defendants, the Trump Corporation, Donald J. Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, and Ivanka Trump, have operated a large and complex enterprise with a singular goal: to enrich themselves by systematically defrauding economically marginalized people looking to invest in their educations, start their own small businesses, and pursue the American dream. Central to defendants' fraudulent scheme was a company called ACN, a multi-level marketing company that offers a business opportunity to individual participants. From 2005 to at least 2015, defendants received millions of dollars in secret payments to promote and endorse ACN. In return, Donald J. Trump told prospective investors that, quote, you have a great opportunity before you at ACN without any of the risks most entrepreneurs have to take. And that ACN's flagship video was, quote, doing $500 million worth of sales a year, end quote. Trump also told investors he had experienced the opportunity and done a lot of research, and that his endorsement was not for money. None of this was true, says the indictment. And then, he notes this. The stories of the alleged victims are heartbreaking. Plaintiff Jane Doe is a resident of California who works as a hospice caregiver. In 2014, she attended a meeting for prospective ACN recruits. As she listened to the presentation, she was skeptical and unpersuaded, but then she saw a promotional video prominently featuring Trump. Trump's endorsement was her turning point. Doe watched clips of ACN's appearing on The Celebrity Apprentice, where Trump stood alongside the founders and praised the company. She listened as Trump said that investing in ACN was a great business opportunity, and the strength of the business opportunity was why she was endorsing it. And then, it goes on. She had no idea that Trump was being lavishly paid for his endorsement. The video made no mention of that. Despite her limited resources, she wrote a check for $499 in reliance on Trump's endorsement. In the 2 years that followed, she paid thousands of dollars in fees and expenses to attend their events. But ultimately, she had extremely limited success. She earned a single check of $38. Eventually, she realized that ACN was not at all what Trump had described and that she was going to continue losing money. When her next annual renewal date came up, she decided not to renew her position. And it goes on. I mean, they just, the whole pyramid scheme, it's all laid out. I'm going to, right at now as we speak, without, actually, I'm going to write in a note here. The Trump crime family, got to spell crime right, family strikes again. And I'm going to retweet this so you can easily find it if you want to, if you know where my Twitter feed is and you're not sure where Judd's is. I just retweeted it. So anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Cliff, I'm sorry, I don't have a city for you. Where are you calling from?
Canyon Country, California.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hey, Cliff, what's up?
Good morning to you. I've been listening, watching, calling your program for several years now, probably 6 or 8, I'm guessing, but they've never been real personal. It's usually just various subjects of interest, but today's different. My brother got bar mitzvah at Tree of Life in 1968. So my connection to that neighborhood goes back pretty far. I got many friends that went there to the temple for Hebrew school, for bar mitzvahs, confirmations. I probably haven't been in that building since the 70s because I moved from Pittsburgh, in the 80s. But it's a great all-American middle-class neighborhood, Squirrel Hill. It's really it was really surreal watching CNN, knowing the whole world was watching my hometown for such a horrendous tragedy.
Yeah.
So I've talked to some people back there. They're stunned. But it's a close-knit community. They'll get through it. But, you know, we've been witnessing these mass shootings and killings for years, since Columbine. I mean, I lived in Austin in the 80s, so I knew about the...
This has been going on since the Reagan administration.
You know, I knew about the Charles Whitman Tower in Austin. He was a sniper.
That was back in the 60s,
Yeah, but that it seemed like an anomaly, you know?
It was.
So now, Tom, we've had over 200 mass shootings just this year alone.
Right.
And I've gotten desensitized to these attacks, you know, because they happen so often. But this one really hit home.
Yeah.
And I just feel so bad for the people that have been affected back there. But the sad reality, Tom, is this isn't going to do anything to advance the gun control debate. I just don't think it will. Why would it? If it didn't happen at Sandy Hook or the Pulse shooting or Vegas, I mean, it's just money in politics rules everything. And
well, it's not just that, Cliff. If Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, we would have gun control. There would be sensible gun control in the United States. You know, they've done it before. You know, Bill Clinton did it in 1995 with the assault weapons ban. George W. Bush chose not to renew it in 2005, and that was the end of that. You know, so and in part, the only reason that the Republicans are holding power is because of voter suppression all across the country, but particularly in the red states. And they're holding power in these states, even where the majority of the voters are voting Democratic or would like to vote Democratic. They're not allowed to at the polls. They don't have the right kind of ID. Student IDs are not allowed, but gun permits are. I mean, we're looking at criminal election fraud being done by the Republican Party in state after state, and it's been going on since the 80s. And the Republican Party has turned into a criminal enterprise.
But it's the money from the NRA that ultimately gets these politicians to vote in their favor, correct?
I cannot disagree. I agree.
Yeah. And then the whole thing is, Tom. I mean, obviously these weapons of war, these assault weapons, have to be banned. But if an individual has this intention to go out and harm people, kill people for whatever reason, it's how can you stop them if nobody knows their intention until they act? So okay, ban all the assault weapons. There's still handguns that can not do as much damage in such an amount of time, but people will still be able to commit these acts, just maybe not, you know, the numbers that they can with the assault weapons.
Yeah.
But
it's as I said, there are three issues here. This guy's core anti-Semitism and all the anti-Semites who celebrate with him, his hatred of immigrants, and thus, you know, this synagogue's being one of the 300 in the country that supports the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS, and his specific saying that it was because of HIAS that he was going to this synagogue to shoot it up. I mean, he said that an hour or two before he went and did this. And then the fact that he had access to a weapon of war and could carry it around in the streets of an American city. These three things, and we need to be talking about all three, in my opinion.
And you know one other thing, Tom? As we sit here and speak, I'm pretty convinced that there's people out there that saw his number, say he did the most Jews ever in this country, 11. You know, there's people out there saying, I could top that. I could beat him.
Yep.
There's people that have that in their mind right now that think he's a hero, but they want to go outdo what he did.
Yep.
That's the sickness.
Yeah, it really and truly is, Cliff. It really and truly is. Cliff, thank you for the call, and thank you for sharing the raw emotion of your experience with us. It's got to be a real tough one. In your communication with the people back home in this neighborhood, you're hearing messages of resilience?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, it's a good.
And I'm not hearing hatred. I'm hearing love.
Yeah, did you see the article about how many Muslims have kicked in how many millions of dollars in little tiny donations to Muslims all over the country to support the synagogue? I mean, this is amazing.
Yes, very powerful.
Yeah. So this is what we need to do. We need to stand up and we need to say, no, we're not a hateful country. We are not a hateful people. We're not going to hate the haters. We are going to call them out. We're going to do everything we can using the law to stop them. And we're going to do everything we can to try to shame them in the process of calling them out so that they go back into the holes from which they have crawled in response to Donald Trump's dog whistle. But, Cliff, thank you for the call. It's good to hear from you. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We're going to be checking in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with Talk Media News in just a second, and then third hour coming along, we'll be picking up your calls. Stick around. And welcome back. Leslie in Central Square, New York, watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Leslie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
I'm great, but I'll get better. How about you?
Okay. Hey, I have to let the people know, and especially the people of the Democratic Party and the senators, corporate senators in the Democratic Party. I mean, Schumer wanted money from Obama to give us, and he's sure he got the money from the banks, but the only ones Obama would support would be corporate Democrats, no progressives. He would not support Perez, okay? I don't give my money to the Democratic Party, their Triple C and all that stuff. To have it just go to corporate Democrats.
Yeah.
Just because Obama wants it that way. I mean, he will not. He does not like progressives. People don't understand that in the Democratic Party, and they should.
Yeah.
And I want to try and let them know that.
I would be
Washington.
Had my call screen software not just crashed, I would be cutting you off right now. So I'm going to try and. In fact, I am. Leslie, thanks a lot for the call. I get it. Right, and if you don't like the so-called corporate Dems, maximum number of licenses. Okay, if you don't like the so-called corporate Dems, don't support them. But we need every Democrat, and do support the progressive Dems out there. I mean, great. But if, for example, Joe Manchin loses in West Virginia, or Heidi Heitkamp loses in North Dakota, you're going to end up with, still having a Republican-controlled Senate. I mean, they may not be right on every issue, and they may have sold out on a few issues. A number of these people, obviously, Joe Manchin with the coal industry, and I don't know who Heidi Heitkamp's taking money from, but it's there. But they're still Democrats, and we need to have a majority Democratic House and Senate in order to get anything done, and in order to advance a progressive agenda. We need all the Democrats. And, I'm guessing that we're probably going to end up at a point in time, maybe months from now, most likely years from now, where the Democratic Party has shifted far enough to, and what they like to call the left. I don't call, healthcare for all and free college education the left. It's the middle. It's the middle among democracies all over the world. It's the middle of America. The vast majority, more than 70% of Americans, support both those things. But, if we're going to get to there, we're going to have to get to there by working on these kinds of issues, by bringing all these Democrats along. And I think that, eventually we're going to reach the point. The Republican Party, is there, right? I mean, there are the few people in the Republican Party left who the Republican base considers rhinos, Republican in name only, the Jeff Flakes, the Bob Corkers. They're leaving, right? They're leaving. And sadly, or not sadly, maybe, the Republican Party is imploding as a consequence of that, because they're not making a deal with my dad's Republicans, right? With the rational Republicans. They're making a deal with the crazies. But the Democratic Party moving in with progressives, becoming the progressive party, that's not making a deal with the crazies. That is not even making a deal with the left. That's making a deal with the political center of America. The political center of America wants debt-free college. The political center of America wants health care for all, and comprehensive health care at all. The political center of America wants comprehensive immigration reform. The political center of America wants reasonable gun control. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising. And you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
On in the world today.
Sorry, I'm in New York today, and there wasn't any background noise, and all of a sudden there is. So sorry about that.
Oh no, it's all good. You couldn't hear anything in the background, Ellen?
No. Okay. So now, what's really fascinating is that Donald Trump tweeted about the media. He said there is great anger in our country, caused in part by the inaccurate and even fraudulent reporting of the news. I guess that means us. The fake news media, the true enemy of the people, must stop and open an obvious hostility and report the news accurately and fairly. That will do much more to put out the flames of anger and outrage than we will be able to bring all sides together in peace and harmony. Give me a break.
You know, when he does this, Ellen, I'm guessing 9 times out of 10, in fact, according to Media Matters and newshounds.us, it probably is 9 times out of 10. He's simply retweeting Fox News. And the thing that's amazing to me is how shocked America is, because so few Americans actually watch Fox News and know how insanely intense the propaganda is over there.
Well, as you know, I'm a liberal on Fox News, so I'm not going to comment on that. But I will say that, you know, that going after us, you and me, as fake news and some of the larger news organizations is crazy.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, also, originally the president had planned to send 800 troops to the Southwest. Now he's sending 5,000, if you can believe that. And Mexico is giving people in the caravan temporary work permits, even though a second caravan is starting.
Yeah. Well, in these caravans, I mean, it's not like there's an unusual number of people coming from Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador to the United States. It's just that instead of trying to make the trek alone and ending up, you know, raped, robbed, beaten, killed, or sold into slavery, and I mean literally those things.
Absolutely.
People are banding together for their own personal safety. That's what's going on. I mean, that's what the innovation is.
Right. And Trump is trying to stop that. And, you know, under international rules, people get a right to a hearing when they cross the border.
Yeah.
And he's not doing that.
Yeah. And this is not just international laws. These are also American laws.
Right. Okay. So now what happened, I have to say, the Democrats are both sides. But when the Trump administration got the House, or when the Republicans got the House, they eliminated an ability to check with the minority on subpoenas. Well, now what goes around comes around, and in fact, if the Democrats take the House, which we're of course hoping they do, that they will now have subpoena power. So what goes around comes around.
Yeah, if they can hold their caucus together. I mean, if the Democrats take the House by 1 or 2 votes, it's going to be really, really tough. If they take the House by...
It's going to be tough, but I still think that they will hold the caucus together. I really do.
From your lips to God's ears, Ellen.
Okay.
What else is up?
Secretary of Defense Mattis he's talking to NATO people. As you know, the president wants to eliminate the arms control treaty with the Soviet Union, saying the former Soviet Union, Russia, is now cheating on it. But NATO is very, very concerned about it. So Defense Secretary Mattis is trying to calm down everybody.
Yeah.
Also, the crash just after takeoff of an Indonesian airline killed 189 people. They haven't found any survivors. The 737 was a brand new 737. It was only in service since August. and the pilot had radioed the tower right after takeoff that there were problems. And there had been problems with it before, but nobody has found any evidence that anybody survived.
Yeah, this is really sad. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, there was that plane a couple of months ago where one of the engines blew up, and it turned out that one of the a little tiny piece in one of the turbine blades was faulty or defective.
Well, this isn't very good for Boeing, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, Angela Merkel is stepping down as chancellor in 2021 when her term ends, but she's also stepping down from the CDU party, which is her party, the right-wing party.
Right, the Christian Democratic Union.
Yes.
Or no, it's not Christian Democratic Union. It's Christian. I forget it. It's in German.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Easy to go by the letters.
They call themselves the Christian Democrats.
Right. Gab.com went offline because they could not find anybody to sponsor their website. As you know, the guy who is accused of killing all the people in Pittsburgh did write on Gab.com. It was started by a right-winger. And GoDaddy said that they are no longer giving Gab.com the ability to be on their website.
Wow. So they're shutting down their domain, basically, if their domain is registered with the GoDaddy.
Basically, and nobody else is willing to take them.
Huh. Yeah.
Now, former President Jimmy Carter is asking the Georgia Secretary of State to resign. His name is Brian Kemp. He's running for governor against Democrat Stacey Abrams, who's, by the way, I was informed because, you know, at my age I have no memory, but I met her parents down in Mississippi. She's actually from Mississippi, Stacey Abrams.
Huh. How about that? It's the 6 degrees of separation. In your case, 1 degree. Remarkable.
Right, exactly. So then, of course, the other issue is health care and how important that's going to be in the midterm elections. A lot of people, the majority of voters in battleground areas and competitive elections, particularly in Florida and Nevada, are saying that health care is very important, and so is protection of pre-existing conditions.
Wow. Remarkable. Ellen Ratner. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News, brought to you by GoatsForTheOldGoat.com and Ellen's new book, Loving What You Do. We'll be back with the third hour of our program right after this. Stick around. It's going to get interesting.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV.
We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising. And you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The fourth largest democracy in the world, Brazil, just on Sunday elected a hard right president. By hard right, I mean somebody who has actually praised the military overthrow of the country, the military coup from a generation ago. And within hours after this election was certified, this is from the Folha de São Paulo. It's in Portuguese, but I've got the English translation here. Policemen and electoral court prosecutors have launched a series of actions at public universities across the country that have sparked a reaction from the academic community and civil society. The measures, mostly related to the monitoring of alleged irregular electoral propaganda, have been happening the last 3 days. Critics of the operations point to censorship. In other words, universities that had opposed this right-wing guy, or have had student groups that opposed him, are being shut down. And there's all these pictures of all these armed police with assault weapons and things walking into the campuses. We're going to try and get somebody who has more expertise on the region in than me to come out and talk about this. But it's extraordinary what's going on. Here we have a political party that is pro-war, pro-gun, pro-death penalty, voted against denying guns to terrorists. Yes, seriously, there was legislation that would have said, if you're on the terrorist watch list, you can't buy a gun. The Republicans shot it down. If you have been adjudicated mentally ill, you can't buy a gun. The Republicans shot it down. Sowing the seeds of racial hatred, opposing food stamps for kids, opposing health care for poor people, shooting up health care clinics, or seeking to shut them down anyway, the party, opposing the peace deal with Iran, denying climate change. I mean, it just goes on and on. This is not a party, it is a cult. And the question I ask is, how do you deprogram cult members? Anyhow, William in Colorado City, Arizona. William, it says here you're a Republican and you wanted to talk about gun control. What's on your mind?
Well, just like you just said, I'm a little hesitant when you say I'm a cult. I don't feel like I am. And I feel like I'm pretty open-minded. I listen to your program, too.
Yeah, my dad was a Republican, and he was not a cult member, but I don't think that he would have been all in on Donald Trump. You know?
And I'm not. I mean, I agree with a lot of what he says, but I also have some issues with what he does.
Okay. But what did you want to say? You're on the air here. What did you want to say?
So we were talking about AR-15s earlier.
Yeah.
You said that they're weapons of war.
They are.
The one that is legal for us to buy is not, in my opinion, and I'm not a spokesman for anybody, this is just me, is not a weapon of war.
Well, what else would you use it for, William?
Okay? I'm a farmer, and I use mine. I have several. I use them all the time for shooting rabbits and stuff like that.
You could shoot rabbits with a regular bolt-action rifle just fine. You could even... there are even semi-automatic rifles that are not weapons of war, that are hunting weapons. I mean, why do you need a weapon of war to shoot rabbits? I don't get it.
I don't think it's a weapon of war because the weapon of war version on the safety, it has safe, fire, and fully automatic. The ones I own do not.
Right, they're semi-automatic. I understand.
Yeah.
Same with Uzis.
Okay,
Same with AK-47s.
Yeah.
And you can own all of those in the United States. You can't own those in Canada. You can't own those in any country in Europe. You can't own those in Australia.
You can own them in Canada. You just have to go through a pretty rigorous process.
It's more than rigorous. It's I mean, yeah, okay. If you have a gun range and people want to rent them, and I don't have a problem. You know, I have shot Uzis, I've shot AK-47s, I've shot old Thompson machine guns, and I've shot AR-15s, and I did it all on a licensed gun range when we lived down in Atlanta. And you know, I got no problem with people being able to walk into a gun range, into a professional environment. And in fact, I took all three of my kids have shot these weapons, you know, I have no problem with that. You know, looking back on it, I'm a little concerned now. You know, the one thing I've learned that I didn't know then is that there's an enormous amount of lead dust that gets blown into the air whenever a gun is fired, and you end up with lead dust all over your hands. And this causes severe and permanent neurological damage. So, you know, I don't so much do it anymore, but I still do competitive shooting with my brother.
That's a problem with an indoor gun range.
Well, it's the problem with just shooting the gun, because you know the air is right there, right in front of your face. But yeah, there's a lot of lead in a range. But my point is that, you know, I'm not calling for guns to be banned. I never have. What I am suggesting is that, number one, weapons of war. And frankly, I think I include semi-automatic weapons, including pistols, in that category. Now, we could have a debate about that, but you know, if you look at the old cop shows prior to the 1980s, every cop in America was using a revolver. They were not using semi-automatic weapons. They were using normal revolvers. And I think that, you know, if we went back to that and get all these semi-automatic weapons off the streets, obviously the cops need them right now because the bad guys have them. But if we could purge our society of semi-automatic weapons, number one. And number two, I think we should do the same thing with guns that we've done with cars. And we started doing this with cars in the 19-teens because cars were killing people. Guns are designed to kill people. So, you know, I mean, it seems even more appropriate for guns. And it's three simple things. Number one, you have a registration or a serial number, a VIN number. In the case of a weapon, it would be a serial number that follows it from birth to death and always is attached to one person by virtue of a title that has to be registered every year with the state, just like your car, number one. Number two, that everybody has to demonstrate their proficiency. When I you know, went through the Georgia Police Academy, I learned how to shoot, you know, the professional way. I had you know, learned how to shoot before on gun ranges, and in fact, back before that, in you know, when I was a kid, in an NRA class, you know, with 22 rifles. But you know, if you can prove that and every state has the mechanism for this. You know, it's what you have to go through to get in most states anyway, to get a concealed carry permit. And number three, insurance. I think it's crazy that if a malicious or drunk driver, or just, you know, a crazed homicidal terrorist maniac had killed all those kids in Newtown or in Parkland with a car, Geico would be paying out $1 million to each one of their families. And because they were killed with guns, there's you know, there's nothing. I mean, you know, families have to run GoFundMe pages to pay for funerals and things. That makes no sense to me. And in fact, that's a Republican free market solution that was suggested back by the Reagan people in the 80s, you know, that there should be liability insurance for gun owners. Because then you're going to have the same thing you have with cars, where, you know, if you've got if you've got a domestic violence conviction, for example, the insurance company is going to look at you and say, you know, as a gun owner, this guy has higher risk than anybody else. So instead of being $50 a year, the liability insurance is going to be $500 a year. Or, you know, if you got two domestic violence convictions, it's $5,000 a year. Just like if you have two drunk driving convictions, it's damn hard to find insurance, and it's very, very expensive. These seem to me like reasonable things, William, and the majority of Americans support these positions. They have been polled. Why would you oppose them?
I oppose them because, one, it's a constitutionally protected right. Two, I think
you have there are. You know, in the Constitution, it says that one of the functions of Congress is to pay for roads, right? It's Article 1, Section 8. You have so you could argue that you have although it's never been adjudicated in the Supreme Court to the best of my knowledge, but you could argue you have a constitutional right to drive a car too on the public roads. But once you're on the public roads, once you're outside your own home, I mean, you can own and drive a car all you want on your own property without a license, without registration, and without insurance. But once you're in the public world, you've got to have those three things. Why not for gun owners?
Okay. And this is what I'm saying is, like you said earlier, guns are made for killing people, right?
Yeah.
Some of them. Guns of war are. When the founders made the Constitution, the reason they put that in there is because we had just barely gotten out of a war with a tyrannical government, right?
No, that's not why. That was actually a 17-year-old kid wrote an article for the NRA magazine in 1974 that made that argument, that the founders wrote the Second Amendment because if the government ever became tyrannical, we the people should be able to overthrow our own government. I have the collected writings of James Madison from the convention. I've written extensively about this. I just finished writing a book about the Second Amendment that will be out on June 4th of next year. It's called The Hidden History of the Second Amendment. That was never even discussed. It wasn't discussed at the Constitutional Convention in the summer of 1787. It wasn't discussed at any of the ratifying conventions. The original Second Amendment was a way of maintaining a militia in each state in the Union during a time when the consensus of most of the founders was that they did not want there to be a standing army when there was not a war going on. They were fine with a standing navy, but there should not be a standing army unless we're having a war. So you have to be able to mobilize the militias really quickly. And the proof of that, you can, in addition to literally page after page after page of discussion of this in Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention, the proof of that is that in order to make sure that that was the case, Article 1, Section 8 says that the Army may not exist for more than 2 years without Congress reauthorizing it every 2 years forever. And if Congress fails to reauthorize the existence of the American Army, Air Force, everything except the Navy, if the Congress fails to reauthorize that every 2 years, it vanishes. So, no, this had nothing to do with being able to overthrow the country. It had to do with the militia. And they changed the word free country in the Second Amendment to free state because Patrick Henry, the largest slaveholder in Virginia, got up and gave a big speech about how in Virginia the militia was called the Slave Patrol, as it was in Georgia. And he got up and he said, if we ever get a president who's a Northerner and we ever have a crisis where the militia in Virginia gets mobilized, they will destroy our slave patrol, and they will, in fact, probably nationalize all of our slaves and put them in the army. And so Madison, A, called him paranoid. You can read it in Madison's notes. And B, he said to Patrick Henry, he said, okay, I'll change the word country to free state. So the state's militias will be protected. This had nothing to do with overthrowing a tyrannical government, William.
Okay, I'll go and look into that. I'll go and look into it, but that's not my understanding of it. But I'm telling
you the truth.
Okay.
In fact, William, if you can find even one sentence in context, in appropriate context, from any of the founders or framers or any time in the first 30 years of the history of this country about the Second Amendment being used to shoot back at the U.S. government, give me a call back and I'll send you an autographed book. Okay?
Okay.
All right, William, we're hitting a break here. I'm sorry I have to end the conversation, but as always, it's good talking to a rational Republican. Thank you for calling. Thank you for listening to us on Sirius XM in Colorado City, Arizona. We'll be back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. It's 18 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Oh, and welcome back. Hi. Every now and then I think I have a break when I don't. Rich in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey, I've noticed, man, a lot of people are so hardcore brainwashed. I don't know what it is with Fox or whatever they're watching. It seems to be most of the people I know that are like this are watching Fox, and there's nothing you can do to talk to them.
I know.
You can't make any sense with them. You can't make any understanding. Like one of my friends, who's been a friend a long time, who's faded into this right-wing thinking, tells me that Democrats have all the money and Republicans don't have anything. And I try to tell him, Who controls everything right now? Who's the president? Who owns the Congress, the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court? And they just kind of sit there. Well, you're wrong. That's all there is to it. And he's just like, well, I got to be quiet and not argue anymore because it isn't working.
Yeah, I have not had. I mean, the call from William that we just had about gun control, that was both enlightening and encouraging in a way, because it suggests that there are Republicans who are willing to listen to reason. And I hope he fact checks me, because I know I'm right. I literally just wrote a book on this topic and spent the better part of a year doing this research. But, he'll turn on, if he turns on Fox News, he will hear somebody repeat that story that 17-year-old kid wrote in that letter to the editor for the Rifleman magazine back in the 70s for, the NRA, that has been just embraced and adopted by the right wing. And obviously it's not just guns. It's like the whole spectrum of issues. There is a real reality, a real world objective reality. There is a liberal take on that and a conservative take on that. But then there's a whole secondary reality that exists almost exclusively within that bubble of Fox News and right-wing talk radio. And amazingly, that's where our president lives right now. And
my daughter just I was out there in Oregon visiting her brother and her uncles are right-wing religious, and they said Jesus put Trump into office.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, and my daughter basically, in very colorful metaphors that I can't say on the phone, she told him he's full of it. That they're out of their mind, and she's only 17, and it's like, ooh, out of the mouth of babes, woo. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to 1988. In 1988, the George Herbert Walker Bush campaign hired a young man who was a recovered alcoholic, fundamentalist Christian, to run their Christian outreach. And he reached out to Jerry Falwell and to Ralph Reed, and they built this connection with the Republican Party. His name was George W. Bush, by the way, the young man that they hired. It was George Herbert Walker Bush's son. And he forged this thing. And actually, it was, I think maybe it was even before that, during Reagan's re-election, but he certainly ran that part of it for his father's election. And the Republican Party has succeeded in reaching out to the conservative evangelical community and basically, co-brand. So if you're a conservative evangelical, Christian evangelical, and I don't mean politically conservative, I mean religiously conservative, you view the Republican Party as basically your brand. It's amazing. Rich, I got to run, but thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's always great to hear from you. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I think that, what we're looking at here is this breathtaking takeover, essentially, of the world by right-wing movements that are being funded by billionaire interests. And it's pretty breathtaking. And they're using anti-Semitism, specifically George Soros as the boogeyman for everything, the Hungarian Jew, who is in the United States and has billions of dollars. I think he's an American citizen now. I'm quite sure he is. But, he fled Hungary. He literally fled the Holocaust. And here he is. I mean, it just blows my mind. It just blows my mind. Mark in Janesville, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom. No, I'm a Democrat, but I also own a AR-15, and I was in the United States Army. Your last caller is a little bit incorrect. The current AR-15s are semi-auto and a 3-shot burst. They learned from the Vietnam War that just wasting a bunch of ammo is ridiculous and burning the barrels up. But anyways, as far as the need for having one of these for hunting, that's ridiculous. I've got bolt action 30-06s, 270s, 308s, 338 Magnums for going out west elk hunting in Alaska, for moose hunting.
Right.
I mean, who uses something that's ridiculous?
I would think, if I saw somebody out in the woods walking around with an AR-15 hunting deer, when I used to have 400 acres in Vermont when we lived there, and there were hunters on our property all the time. If I'd seen somebody with an AR-15, I would have been torn between whether I should be laughing hysterically or I should be calling the police.
Yeah, I would have thought he was an idiot. But anyways, I'll tell you why I don't believe this nonsense. Like I said, I was in the United States Army back in the late 70s. As far as overthrowing the government, you're going to go up against the United States Army or the United States Marine Corps?
You're going to take out a Black Hawk helicopter with your AR-15, really?
And not even that. The National Guard, that's idiots. But the bottom line is why I think you need them is I believe, and I own your book, 2016, there's going to be such an economic calamity possible for personal safety. And this is caused by the Republicans. I mean, I think they'll be fighting in the streets, and you won't have the social safety nets, and there'll be a total breakdown. I blame this on the Republicans.
Yeah.
I
get it, Mark. I get it. I'm not, I am hopeful that is not the direction we're going. We have been through a civil war once before, and we've also been through multiple eras in our history where we've had riots and things like that. But, even then, an AR-15 seems to me like overkill. Mark, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from a rational gun owner. 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Stick around. Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph, Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a 6-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country." More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared, "The era of big government is over." The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, from Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink. All aboard! It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent Seven Seas Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly, me and Louise, as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Steve Schmidt tweeting PBMUS over at Democratic Underground just posted this, and tip of the hat for that. I would have missed it. This was posted yesterday, and I was traveling back from LA yesterday. Steve Schmidt tweeted the following. It's a 4-tweet rant. He says, Gingrich looked into the camera and said that the election was about two things, Kavanaugh and the caravan. All day, every day, Fox News and the Trump propaganda industry spews forth an unrelenting river of conspiracy theories, venom, and lunacy. And like a precision-guided munition, it finds its intended targets. Now, keep in mind, this is Steve Schmidt, the Republican election strategist who ran the John McCain for President campaign in 2008 when he ran against Barack Obama. It finds its intended targets. Among them are the feeble-minded, sick, and racist. Its singular purpose is incitement, and it is working. A migration of poor and desperate human souls has been turned into an invading army, a panzer division about to crash through America's southern border. The intent is as malignant as it is purposeful. There is only one goal. That is to create a frenzy of craziness before an election where the American people will have their first opportunity to repudiate the vile and filthy regime led by Trump. Now we see the terrible cost of Trumpism. The lies, conspiracy theories, coded racist and anti-Semitic language, intimations of violence, and declarations that opponents are enemies of the state, and people have activated the evil people who attempted the largest assassination plot in American history and gunned down 11 Americans at a temple in Pittsburgh. They have been radicalized by the contagious poison of an American president and his fellow travelers. The hour for pretending there is no causation between the rhetoric and the violence is over. The stated motives of these terrorists is a recitation of the message flowing like sewage from the White House, Fox News, Judicial Watch, Mark Levine, Limbaugh, and Gingrich. It is not accidental, and it is not coincidental. It is the deadly and inevitable consequence of Trump. Remarkable. Kim in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, Kim, what's up?
Hey, I was calling to talk to you about the causes of some of these issues, especially the racism, the prejudice, the anti-Semitism. We're always blaming the other in this country. And to me, the answer is to point out that austerity is the other. Austerity is the problem. It is not your brown neighbor, right? It is not the African-American down the road who has a job. That's not it, okay? We have to stop looking at poor and powerless people as the problem, because the problem is austerity. It's this mindset that we can squeeze the system so tightly that the only burden is borne by the very poorest, the very least able to carry that burden, and that can just continue and continue. And the less education we have and the less money we put into social safety net, the more this problem is going to be rearing its ugly head.
Yeah.
We cannot address it without addressing austerity.
I agree.
That's all.
I agree, and austerity is this is what we call neoliberalism, right? The political word for what you're talking about, and the idea that the government is bad and evil, and we need as little government as possible, and private industry and private enterprise and the billionaires that run them are noble and good.
Demonstrably false.
Yeah, I know, and yet people all over the world are buying this stuff, Kim.
Yeah. I mean, our government is huge. We're involved in everything in every corner of the globe, and we are an empire that knows no bounds. We literally do not feel bound to our government. That is, not you and I, not rational people, but our government feels no bounds. Everything is under our control. We are the only sovereignty. I mean, I swear, when I listen to Trump talk, when he says America first, what he's saying is America's way or the highway. That's what I hear him saying.
Yeah. And really what he's saying is Trump's way or the highway, not even America's way, because he does not represent the opinion of the majority of Americans.
Right. And it's not even Trump. I mean, because as you just mentioned, neoliberalism, this is not, the austerity policies are not the Republican policy. These are the governmental policies of the last 4 decades. And although lip service has been paid by the Democrat Party to progressive ideas and ideals.
Party. Yes.
I'm not going to call them Democratic because they're not.
But that's the name of the party, so let's be respectful. But yeah, I get what you're saying, and I, broadly speaking, I agree with everything you're saying, Kim. So I'm going to move along. Thank you for the call, Dennis in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I didn't think I'd get in. I accidentally hung up on you earlier. I just wanted to give you kudos, number one, on pointing out the real reason for the synagogue shooter, which was Trump trumpeting to him, giving him marching orders, just like he did the bomber.
About immigration, yeah.
Yes, and but my main topic was, we are really facing a pivotal moment. This spread of fascism throughout the globe due to Trump it's like an aggressive cancer. And not only is this a threat to democracy in Brazil, but it's a threat to the environment as well, because this guy wants to eradicate the rainforests over there.
Yeah, he wants to clear them for ranch land and for development. He's got for drilling and all this other kind of stuff, just like what Ryan Zinke's doing right now to the American West. They're already, right now as we speak, they've already started fracking on public lands, turning parks into wastelands. Dennis.
One other interesting thing that I bet you're not aware of, I tried to record the Hannity show the other day, and I DVR programs all the time, and a message came up on my receiver that said, receiver not authorized to record this program, which I assume is so that you can't document his lies.
Wow.
I thought it was a wow, too. I couldn't believe it. I've never seen that.
That's amazing, Dennis, because now thinking back, I mean, virtually every clip that I've ever seen of the Hannity show or any of the primetime shows on Fox has been a picture that somebody took with their camera, their cell phone camera, of their own TV. It hasn't, with the stuff that gets put on Twitter.
Reason.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, between that and giving it away on free basic cable, whereas MSNBC is premium cable, these are the structural things. This is how they, just the same way they do with elections, they do this structural stuff to maintain their dominance. Dennis, thank you for the call and thanks for the information. That's shocking. Joanne in Nelsville, Wisconsin. Am I saying that right, or is it Neelsville?
Neelsville.
Neelsville. Hey, Joanne, what's up?
I'm 77 years old, and for the past 25 years, I've kept notes on both sides. And the past 10 years, I've been like, oh my God, what in the world? And people have been questioning why the evangelicals are standing behind Trump. I believe in the power of prayer. I've seen prayer answered many times in my family, my grandparents' family. I believe in it. But what I've been shocked at, I went, oh my goodness, how do we get through this? On these different religious programs that go all around the world, if you are a Democrat, you are evil, you are ungodly. If you don't vote GOP, you're disobeying God. And I, yeah, right. But then when they said they were actually praying all over the world to put this shield around Trump that nothing will touch him, I went, what Bible are they reading out of?
Yeah.
And that has really disturbed me. And one of the things, because I'm 77 and I've questioned all my life, that one of the things I notice about people, they never question. They don't know their history. When Trump first started running, I recognized the Nazi propaganda right away because I've been studying since I was 15 years old.
Mm.
And I recognized how it's done. And I'm going, oh my goodness! And I work at a food pantry. And when he was running, I told people if he gets into office, this nation is going to weep.
Yeah. Yeah,
because
you're
I
absolutely
saw
right.
it was coming down.
Yeah.
And if somebody wants to debate with me, I always tell me I'll debate with you. I got 25 years of notes. You want to look at them?
Yeah, I get it. Well, one of the things that really shocked me and that I just learned last week, and I learned it from Joe Scarborough of all people, is that the number one component of Hitler's propaganda strategy in the 30s in Germany as documented by his propaganda minister, Goebbels, was, and I quote, "Never let the people cool down." In other words, every single day you have to do or say something a little more outrageous than the day before to get the people cranked, even the people who hate you, to get them cranked, to get the people on the streets, to further polarize people, to further, strengthen the camps on both sides so that, you can wipe out the other side of it ultimately and eventually. And the Christian stations, I mean, Trump, his outreach to the Christians was really simple. You guys want to be able to do politics, from the pulpit. Right now, if you do that, you lose your tax-exempt status. I'm going to repeal the Johnson Amendment, which was passed in the 1950s, which was a deal basically between the government and the churches, that if the churches just stuck to religion and didn't get into politics, we'll give you a nonprofit status. But if you're going to do politics, you should register as a political party or something, or you're going to have to pay taxes. And Trump's saying, you can do politics and not pay taxes, which is the exact thing that, James Madison most feared, was the corruption of the churches by politics. And Jefferson, of course, was concerned about the corruption of politics by the churches. Now both is happening. And these Christian stations, the business model for them, Joanne, and most people aren't familiar with this. I've been in the radio business since I was 16. I'm very familiar with it. And in fact, I've been to the National Religious Broadcasters Association's annual convention. And the business model is there are radio stations that simply rent time. And they don't have any particular shtick or ideology. They just want to make money, right? And so they say, okay, it's $1,000 an hour to rent time on this station. And so the televangelists, they get these stations, they pay them the $1,000 for that hour. During that hour, they'll do several sales pitches asking for people to give them money. And every day they're keeping track of the calls and of the cash coming in. And if it costs them $1,000 and they make $2,000, then they stay on the station. If it costs them $1,000 and they only make $800, they drop that station and move along. And some of these guys are on 1,000 different stations, and they're fine-tuning their messages literally every day. And they're tracking the results of these messages by how much revenue is coming in, how many donations are coming in to the televangelist, that also helps pay for the stations. And so I'm guessing that these people have figured out that if they throw in with Trump, that the Trump acolytes, the Trump heads, the maggots, folks, are going to say, "Oh, cool, I should send more money to this pastor because he's one of us. He's joined our tribe." And because I guarantee you, Joanne, they wouldn't be doing it if it didn't make them money, which is really a tragic thing to say about, because I agree with you about the power of prayer, but it's a tragic thing to say about some of our religious elders. But that's what's going on. Joanne, thanks so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. It's 48 minutes past the hour. I forgot to say at the very beginning of the show, and it's a terrible thing to forget, to thank Jefferson Smith for filling in for me from X-Ray FM. He's the program director over there and helps run the station and does his own show. And he always does a great job filling in for me when I have to be out of town. And on Friday, I had a meeting with my publisher for this book on the Second Amendment down in San Francisco. And then Saturday, I was in Los Angeles with Greg Palast for KPFK. And Jefferson came in and did a great job, as he always does. And thank you, Jefferson. And speaking of X-Ray FM here in Portland, Oregon, Jeff, listening on X-Ray FM, you're on the air. I'm assuming you're not Jefferson Smith.
That's right. I'm not. Yeah, Jefferson always does a great job. Thanks for taking my call, Tom, and for another great show. By the way, Common Dreams has a good post regarding President Carter's letter, the one Ellen mentioned, to Brian Kemp. So it's worth checking out for people. And
thanks for the heads up.
A couple of previous callers kind of touched on what I'm calling about, and it's been 38 years since Ronald Reagan said, quote, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help," unquote. And, thus began the modern Republican war on government, which has led to massive deregulation of corporations, giving them free rein to externalize their costs or socialize their losses, if you will, in terms of air pollution, killing 7 million people a year worldwide, water pollution to the point where we're all ingesting these microplastics, I'm sure, on a regular basis, and of course climate change with the monster storms, floods, fires, and the existential threat to life as we know it. Most of these, Tom, began as slow-moving disasters that have sped up enough for the media and a lot of people to take notice and reject Reagan's original anti-government message and embrace the Bernie Sanders message of corporate accountability, living wages, and good government. And normally that would be what this election would be about, Tom, and it still is. But the events of last week, the tragedy of last week, to me, illustrate the slow-moving disaster we need to address first and foremost in these next 8 days. And that's the slow-motion fascism that began with Trump coming down that escalator, kicking off his campaign, demonizing the other. In that case, it was Mexican immigrants. And so whether we're talking about his big lies about immigration, his disregard for people of color, contempt for women, or his relentless attacks on our free press, on November 6th, and I think Jefferson Smith even said this Friday, we need to vote and monitor our votes like our democracy depends on it, because it darn well might. And can I give out a hotline for people experiencing voting problems, Tom? Yeah. Okay, you and Greg Palast have been heroic on that issue, and it's an election protection hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-687-8683, and it's set up by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights.
866-OUR, O-U-R, vote, V-O-T-E, right?
Yeah, and I think it's for anybody having problems, getting their ballot or showing when they show up at the polling place, having trouble, being able to vote. So, we don't need to just show up. We need to make sure our votes are counted.
Yeah. Yep. Well said, Jeff. Jeff, thanks so much for the call, and thanks for listening to X-Ray FM, and a shout out to the station as well. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. It is 52 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I just read a live read on our commercial stations for expressvpn.com/Tom, which is it protects your internet traffic from, now that the Republicans have destroyed net neutrality. I'm actually really happy that we've got a VPN company as a advertiser, because we need to be doing this. We need to protect ourselves from the companies that are delivering the internet into our home, because they're tracking us now. They're keeping track of what we do and selling the information. And it's a terrible, terrible thing what's going on since the Republicans destroyed net neutrality. Gary in Huntington, West Virginia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thank you once more. If you don't mind, quickly, it's time to cut to the chase. This isn't complicated. and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because I was on the same wavelength with you last week. This is the continuing question, this essential question, the continuing decline of democracy. What are we going to do about it?
Right.
What are we going to do about it?
Well, what we have to
we
do is get, because of the structural things that the Republicans have put into place, and because of 4 decades of massive election fraud on the part of the Republicans, including everything from purging voting lists to bizarre voter ID laws that, as the Supreme Court in North Carolina concluded, were surgically drawn to exclude people of color. Because of that, we have to not just win elections, we have to overwhelmingly win elections, which means we need to get out the vote. Gary, I got a bunch of other callers I want to get through here, but I know that you and I are on the same channel on that. Stephen in Milford, New York. Hey, Stephen, what's up? Stephen? I'm sorry, Stephen, you've got to listen to your phone, not your radio. John in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. Hey, John, what's up?
Real quick, Tom, I think the Democrats should start getting on Trump. When he says he's a nationalist, I think he's both a nationalist and a globalist. Because not only he has his hotels throughout the world, but he's also sanctioning a bunch of countries throughout the world, and the petrodollars throughout the world, while it's starting to be dropped. But Trump's more a globalist than he is a nationalist. I think the Democrats should start getting on him about that.
Yeah, and the fact that even the MAGA hats are made in Mexico now. I mean, the last batch that I saw, tweeted out, where people are showing the made-in pictures before they were made in China. So, I mean, all these people who are running around saying, I'm a MAGA, hey, MAGA all, and all of his merchandise is made overseas. His daughter's stuff was all made overseas before it came out that her business partner was a criminal, and she kind of shut it down before the investigation could get started. They were making that. I mean, yeah.
Well, let's start seeing ads, Tom. The Democrats need to start running ads. It's 1 week left.
Well, that is using Trump's meme, and that's the problem. You're amplifying that very meme. I think just calling him a hypocrite rather than a globalist is the way to do it, because that's what he. So anyhow, John, thanks a lot for the call. Appreciate it. It's been a fascinating day. Thanks again to Jefferson Smith for filling in for me. He did a great job on Friday. I'll be back tomorrow and every day this week, Lord willing. And until then, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy requires all of us, and that means all of us, and you and me and your brother-in-law and your guy next door and your friends. And get them out to the polls. Get them voting. Please get out there. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.